Now, I know what you're thinking. A PhD in Old Norse and the history of the Scandinavian languages, and author of a ridiculous Star Wars parody. And yes, it's true. These great feathers in my cap bespeak a long career of success with women. That was a lie about the success with women. Um, well, so I am Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and this is another installment in my Ranch Porch Series about things that either are not related to Old Norse, that concern personal opinions, or in this case are just not important. And I really ought to be sitting in the rocking chair because I'm so ornery. I sound like an old man about this subject. That the rocking chair is kind of broken. So, in early 2010, I was a PhD student at the University of Wisconsin, and Facebook was something pretty new. I mean, I barely used Facebook in the last 5 years, but back then, it was still kind of cool, and the statuses were still in third person, so I never really knew what to do with those status updates, and I started just putting movie quotes in those. So, for example, I would take some, fairly meme-ified movie quote, and I would turn myself into the subject of it. So, it might be a Star Wars quote like, "That's no moon, it's a space station," but my stupid Facebook status update becomes, "Jackson's no moon, he's a space station," right? Something like that. Well, after doing a few Star Wars quotes like that as status updates, my friend and colleague, Ben Fry, at the University of Wisconsin at the time, he commented and said, I can see a way in which someone who works on the Icelandic sagas might find Star Wars appealing. Now, in fact, these status updates had nothing to do with any particular affection that I had for Star Wars. I mean, I also did like Arnold Schwarzenegger movies for these things, and it's just that Star Wars is such a cultural touchstone these days, right? I mean, Star Wars has become, for late 20th century, early 21st century English-speaking culture, it has become, I would say, unfortunately become, something kind of like what the Saga of the Volsungs was to the Norse, or the Iliad was to the ancient Greeks. A story that everyone knows, and even if you haven't seen Star Wars, you understand, that there is something called the Force, that there is a group of good guys called the Jedi. Even if you haven't seen Star Wars, if you're a student in one of my classes and I come into the class and I'm breathing like this, you know that I'm setting myself up as a bad guy. Similarly, if I come in and I'm talking in kind of a froggy voice and I'm saying stuff like, "This advice must you heed," something like that, you know that I'm setting myself up as this wise counselor. Even if you haven't seen, again, these movies with Darth Vader and Yoda. So I was actually in a position of not being a particularly big Star Wars fan. I had seen the original trilogy. I'd seen the prequels that had come out when I was in high school and early college. But I hadn't paid a whole lot of attention to it. I'd never read any of the novels. I'd never played any of the games or engaged in that whole very obsessive universe. Anyway, Ben said that I can see some similarities, and I started thinking about it, and I realized yeah, there are some similarities beyond Icelandic sagas. The kind of epic story of a family, especially including conflicted loyalties between family and one's lord, if you will, that I saw in a character like Darth Vader in the original trilogy, struggling between his loyalty to the Emperor and his loyalty to his son Luke. I thought that was very saga. And it also made me think about, in Old High German, the only, or one of the very few traces of heroic poetry of the type that we find about the Volsungs in Old Norse or Beowulf in Old English. The fragment called Hildebrand's Lied, where you have Hildebrand encountering his son Halfdan on the field of battle. Halfdan has been raised by Hildebrand's enemies. He doesn't believe that Hildebrand is his father. And although the end of the story is not preserved in that fragment, we know from other versions of the story that are preserved from later that Hildebrand kills Halfdan, his son, who doesn't believe that he is his son. That reminded me a lot of Darth Vader and Luke, although of course it ends with the father killing the son rather than vice versa. And I thought that was kind of an interesting twist. So what I did, taken off from that and from this conversation with Ben, that was on Facebook and then later in person, is I wrote up a précis, a kind of introduction to what I imagined as an Icelandic saga that Star Wars could have been, not based on. People actually kind of missed that this was part of my joke, but that had grown out of the same quote-unquote Germanic tradition as Star Wars. That Star Wars was based actually on a German version of the story. So pretty much what I had in mind here was that the saga that I was talking about, Tattúínárdǿla saga, saga of the people of the Tatooine River Valley, based, of course, on kind of a parody of something like Vatnsdøla saga, saga of the people of the water valley, or Laxardøla saga, Laxdøla saga, saga of the people of the Salmon River Valley, was that this Tattúínárdøla saga was like the saga of the Volsungs to the Nibelungenlied that was the German story that Star Wars, the movies, had actually been based on. So it's actually an alternative, not what my joke was not that this was what Star Wars was based on, but a related old story to the German story that I said George Lucas had ripped off to make Star Wars. Anyway, so I wrote up this introduction to Tattúínárdøla saga. I explained all this. There was this, this fake scholarly commentary on it. And let's see, this was like early February 2010. And then as now, I usually would spend the weekend off the internet. So I did. And then I came back Monday morning or Sunday night, and this thing had gotten on Fark and Reddit and Metafilter, and all of a sudden this post that I had just made on this ridiculous blog, Tattúínárdøla saga.wordpress.com, which who could possibly remember it, but that suddenly had 10,000 hits a day for a little while. So when it got all that attention, I decided I would actually write out the saga. And that took 2 years. That was a 2-year process. There's a raven flying by. Let's see if that comes into camera view. Oh, here's a second one. While I'm talking about this Star Wars horseshit, I am watching the ravens, and I'm watching a beautiful sunset out in the direction of Pikes Peak. I actually recorded a little video of that off the porch before I started recording this, so I'll end the video with that. You can see what I've been enjoying while I'm wasting my time talking about Star Wars. Anyway, once this original introductory post had gotten popular, I started actually writing out the saga chapter by chapter. I wrote it out in Old Norse and in English. I was blatantly ripping off a lot of real sagas, especially Saga of the Volsungs, Saga of Egil Skallagrimsson, Laxdøla saga, Njál saga, a lot of these big sagas. I blatantly ripped off lots of dialogue and stuff from them. I stole stuff from Old High German too. Obviously, like I said, Hildebrand's Lied was a big influence on the story that I wrote out. I stole stuff from the Merseburg charms too. I even stole a couple little things from Old Irish, some stuff about Nuadu Silverhand. I was just stealing all over the place from medieval stuff, because the whole idea was that it was, a sort of loving pastiche. I actually enjoyed working with these medieval things and kind of trying to figure out ways to mesh them into the Star Wars universe. So over the course of about 2 years, I wrote out the actual saga. And I did it in Old Norse and in English, like I said. You know, the only excuse I can give you is that I think it did help me practice Old Norse a little bit for my quals, my PhD comprehensive exams. Anyway, so, you know, I thought that there were some kind of clever things about it. You know, I said, and you know, I enjoyed the commentary part of it more than the story in some ways. You know, the kind of made up, learned commentary on the saga. So I said, for example, that in early manuscripts, what you would find is Hom Gongu Hani, dueling Hani, Han Solo, right? That he had thrown his axe first at the mercenary Greedo, but that later recensions of the saga and later manuscripts were more influenced by chivalric literature. And so in those later manuscripts, Greedo is awkwardly worked in as throwing his axe at Hani first, because we can't have Hani throwing his axe first, right? So Hom Gongu Hani scout first, Hom Gongu Hani threw shot first. You know, it was my ridiculous take on the whole Han shot first thing, which was a big deal to people back then. I guess probably still to some people on the internet. You know, what else? Since the master-apprentice relationship isn't a big deal in Norse culture, I made the Jedi, or the Jedi Fjordinger, the Jedi Fjord people, I made them a family, and then Anakin is adopted into that family by Viga Obi-Wan, killer Obi-Wan. And he ends up then and the surface of Falfadin, why I did the Grimm's Law thing to his name, to Palpatine, I cannot recall, who is, of course, King of Norway. That is obviously a relationship that's in tons of sagas. You know, they meet and serve or have conflicts with the King of Norway, so it made sense, something to do here. And, of course, like Hildebrand's Lead, I have it end with a fight between Lucre and Anakin, which has Anakin actually kill Luke. And then, well, it's not quite the end, because then toward the very end, Hom Gongu Hani and Leia, Luke's sister, have a child who then kills Anakin in vengeance for Lucre. And you know, I worked in a lot of kind of family tension that was very present in my mind at the time that I was writing this too. So I think the thing often has sort of a dark view of a family loyalty, or the lack thereof, which mesh pretty well with Star Wars, mesh pretty well with the saga, the genuine sagas. But the whole thing, I spent too much time on. You know, I haven't looked back on it in years and years. The only reason I haven't taken it offline is because I'm afraid someone else would post it and take credit for it. And I did put a lot of time into it. You know, and I also think about the fact that there used to be this great, it's probably still out there somewhere, this great Star Wars parody in Shakespearean English online that was actually done by a Shakespeare scholar. I wish I could remember the name right now. But then Lucasfilm actually produced its own Shakespeare Star Wars, and it wasn't as good. And I guess part of it is that if they ever do the Viking Star Wars, I kind of want to have that testament out there that someone did this who actually kind of knew what they were talking about with Vikings, right? Lucasfilm, by the way, actually wrote me a nasty letter about this thing. That was way back at the beginning in 2010 when it was getting all these hits. Basically just, you know, they weren't going to waste their time reading my fan fiction, which is not what it was. It was a parody by someone who was not actually a big fan. Anyway, they said, you know, we're not going to waste our time reading your fan fiction, but we would like to encourage you to write about characters and worlds of your own creation, and, you know, basically reminding me that, you know, I couldn't make a cent off of this, or you know, they would sue me into eternity, which is fine. I never made money off of it. I don't intend to. I'd be embarrassed to, right? Funny postscript to that, when I was working on Frozen and I was in the Walt Disney Animation Studios, a Disney employee that will remain nameless sympathized with my experience with Lucasfilm, which, they just, I kind of get it. I can't answer all of my mail either, or email either. I can't, and I guess if I saw something online that looked like it was derivative of my work and getting a lot of attention, I might be pretty snippy with the person that produced it. But I thought it was just, it rubbed me the wrong way. Their little letter, sent on letterhead, no less, with a letterhead, whatever you'd call it, envelope. So I don't really care about Tattúínárdǿla saga anymore. This is the blog is still up. You can still read through the whole damn thing. I took everything but that saga off of that old blog with its impossible URL, tattúínárdőlasaga.wordpress.com. The Cowboy Hovel was originally posted there as a note for those who follow my stuff, just because it was a place where I thought it would get attention, and it did. Now, of course, the Cowboy Hovel appears printed as an appendix in my translation of the Poetic Edda, and it's also on my new website, jacksonwcrawford.com, where you will find no mention of Tattúínárdőla saga because it plays very little role in my conception of my life. But there you have it. I've admitted on this channel, the biggest audience I've ever had, or probably ever will have, that I did write that damn thing. And, like I said, it's a testament to a life with its lack of success in the department of impressing women. All right. You folks have listened to me yak long enough. You can read the thing if you want to. I actually recommend reading the introduction more than I recommend reading through it chapter by chapter. I got tired of it myself back then and inserted this long lacuna, which of course is sort of realistic in terms of the preservation of medieval manuscripts, so I wouldn't have to write 2 damn Death Stars, right? Anyway. All right. From beautiful Colorado, watch for the sunset right after this. I'm gonna put it after my hat tip in the video. From beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.